What do you think of those programs that say, you know what, you could lift a lightweight, you just got to do a lot of reps?
I mean, honestly, it goes against everything we study because, so, I mean, if we're being real here, I'm a mom with 2 kids, a full-time job. Ain't nobody got time for that. Like, I mean, when we think about the muscle, we're seeing potentially greater anabolic resistance younger, like in earlier ages than women. So why would you? Like, lifting heavier weights has a greater stimuli to the muscle, and it increases testosterone and growth hormone, which has a better effect. So, I mean, I think the question or the response, if we're playing devil's advocate, you might, if you're having, joint issues, or, that's when you might think about some of the, blood flow restriction or including some of those other things. But in reality, a lot of that we look at a lot of high intensity resistance training. It's actually better on your body because it's lower volume. So that would not be something I would start with, but obviously there's a time and place for everything.
Although we don't know what that time and place is, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be for a woman with a job and kids and no time. I would not recommend.
By the way, how old are your kids?
6 and 7.
Are you training them?
I mean, they are very active, and right now I'm working, they think that men are always stronger than women. So, we got to prove that a lot wrong.
Just a short sidebar story, because I don't know if you'll do this with your kids. When our kids were little and we'd visit their grandparents in Iowa, we would take them to the local high school or grade school and make them run hills. And to them, they thought it was normal. That's what parents do. They bring their kids to the school. Okay, today we're going to run 20 hills or 10 hills or whatever. And then later on, when they get to high school and older, they're like, nobody makes anybody run hills. You made us run hills. And I think that's what you should do with your kids, Abbie. Take them to the damn track. And okay, today we're going to do 100-meter repeats with a 50-meter jog. And they'll be like, whoa, this is great. It's fun. So, I don't know what you do, but I think that would be great with your kids.
Yeah, we do more like relay races, and it has to be some level of competition. Who's going to win? I have 2 little boys. And so, yeah, we definitely have that always on the go.
I like that. Yeah, you got to push them, because otherwise they'll get lazy. Because you know how boys are. When they become teenagers, I don't even know if they'll listen to anyone. I was a teenager. Tony was a teenager. So
Good to know. We're not there yet.
You got to mold them when they're young. Okay, switching tack. You've done quite a bit of work on high intensity interval training. And there's always, well, it's not really a debate. It's usually, if you go on social media, if you're not doing high intensity interval training, all the other aerobic type training is a waste of time, which I've always thought is odd, because even elite endurance athletes don't just do high intensity interval training. They do a variety of it. So speak to the variety of different aerobic training modes, whether it's HIIT, whether it's sit, sprint interval training, or whether I call it steady state cardio. Others call it tempo training. Others it seems like there's 1,000,001 ways to refer to these types of training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I am biased. We study a lot of HIIT, and the best way to describe it, so I'm a former endurance athlete. I still do a lot of moderate intensity exercise. But one advantage, or multiple advantages, of the high intensity interval training is that you get a faster bang for your buck. And so you see adaptations faster. And that's not only, our lab has shown an increase in muscle from aerobic exercise, which you don't often see from more of our moderate intensity steady state. We see an increase, significant changes in our metabolic health. So mitochondria, which impacts glucose. And then also kind of fatigue resistance. So for example, if I take someone that's untrained and they feel better after 1 or 2 sessions, that's a win, because maybe now they want to exercise more. And so the best way, it's a great thing to do if you have very little time and you actually either want to maintain your fitness or see some results. Whereas we all know, if you go out and do moderate intensity exercise, sometimes you feel pretty terrible or you're just fatigued. HIIT takes much less time and we still see results. And so it's always a blend of both that I recommend, but then depending on the person, okay, so even for my example, when let's say postpartum, after having a baby, I didn't have time to go run, 8 miles, but I was able to do, 10, 15 minutes of HIIT. And that helped me get back my fitness status more quickly. with less volume. So as I was kind of still postpartum or trying to, produce milk or whatever that may be. So it's more of a strategy. It's a strategy that I would use amongst lots of types of exercise.
How often?
Go
Oh, I'm
on.
sorry. I
No,
would
just
say
quickly,
how,
so the, I know we have defined parameters, but for those who listen, what are we looking at in the HIIT as a measure of intensity, just quickly for them?
That's a great question. So it is quite variable, and we've looked at a lot of different, actually, one of the things I first looked at is a lot of the research relied on these, more repeated wind gates, 30 seconds,
Okay.
percentage of your body weight. That's not feasible. And nobody has that equipment. And so we've looked at different methods, but kind of landed on 1 minute on, 1 minute off. You
Got
can
it.
do anything for a minute.
Got
And
it.
when we think about what that intensity is, usually I say pick an intensity that you couldn't hold for 1:20. And so that's all relative. Like my 1:20 might be
Right.
different than yours. And then as I become more fit or less fit, that intensity changes. Or let's throw in the menstrual cycle. Some days I feel really terrible and I can't go
You're right.
at my typical high intensity, but it's slightly a different intensity, but that's what it is for me. And so we're still seeing benefit from that. It's higher than I would if I were just to do steady state, which then increases heart rate, which is really the driving factor. You hold a higher heart rate that you normally wouldn't be able to sustain.
Yeah, that's
many
also
days a
simple. Yeah, 1-to-1 and do what for 1 minute, what you couldn't for 1:20. I love that.
yeah, how many days a week could you do that without killing yourself?
Yeah, I love that when people are like, oh, I do HIIT every day. I'm like, well, then you're not doing HIIT. I would say we've done some work with 3 days a week, and that's a lot. I would say 2 days a week is a good thing to shoot for, even 1 day a week. If you're fit and you're doing other things, 1 day a week is a really good way to kind of blend it in. But it also goes to say, if you don't have a lot of time, then a couple days a week is a really good way to kind of maintain or even increase fitness. But yeah, you can't do it every day. And I would argue if you do it more than 3 days a week, it's a futile activity. Like you're gonna not recover and have some of those negative side effects.
Mhm.
No, I'm glad you said that because there are many people online who say they do HIIT every time they do cardio. And I'm thinking, I do it once a week and I'm dead. But again, Tony and I were a little older, so maybe it takes longer for us to recover. But I'm thinking, even if I did this twice a week, I'd be like, I think I'd want to sleep the rest of the day. Like it just kills me. So yeah, I do it every, 5 or 6 days a week. So I'm like, I don't think so. You're not doing HIIT. You're doing low intensity interval training, which by definition is not interval training. So
Or the weekend warriors where they do that and then they don't do anything for the next 6 days or whatnot,
Is there a sex difference in terms of how you adapt to HIIT? Do women and men adapt differently?
It's a great question. I don't think we have the answer to that. I think,
Mhm.
no, both men and women will respond. And we actually have some interesting mouse data. It's the only mouse study I've ever done, but we looked at 2 genetic models of mice. One in particular that had a paradoxical response to exercise, meaning with exercise, they gained fat and lost muscle.
What?
And yeah, and it was like that genetic breed in male and
Okay.
female. And so we wanted to see, would HIIT mitigate those effects compared to regular aerobic exercise? And it did. And so if we took those paradoxical responding mice and did HIIT with them versus moderate intensity exercise, they actually then responded the way they should. They lost fat and gained muscle. And so in our females particularly. And so it's laid a really interesting foundation of maybe why we should having our women participate in some HIIT.
How did you
Wow.
how did you get the mice to run?
So they're on the back of a treadmill, that like a shock basically, to get them to go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen those devices. I'm like, that would get me to run if I was getting my ass shocked.
But how we have in human, like I'm a human subjects researcher, and we do these like elaborate interventions, and then never fails, you have people that regardless they're gaining fat and losing muscle. And so the mouse model was such a great model to say like, well, yeah, that happens in humans too. It's not because they're not compliant, it's because we have different genetics. But so that's some of what we're exploring now is, should we be doing some differences or changing work to rest ratio in females, knowing And how do some of those mechanisms change, particularly as hormones change? So for us, like in perimenopause.